Did your family have favorites? If so, were you the favorite or someone else?
She lifted her glass high like it was a microphone and, with that bright voice she uses when she wants the whole room to turn in her direction, she announced that she was pregnant and then leaned toward me with a smile that was all teeth and territory and whispered, very softly and very clearly, that I should try topping that, and in that instant, while everyone around us started clapping and talking over one another and asking for due dates and nursery themes and whether they could post it too. The family chat, I felt that familiar drop in my stomach that I have known since childhood, the one that comes when you realize the moment you earned has been swiped off the table and replaced with a show you did not consent to watch, and I decided, as I kept my face calm and my hands steady on the stem of my glass, that if she wanted a game, then I would play a game, just not the one she expected. I did not make a scene, because I have learned that scenes are her preferred field and that she plays loud very well, so I stayed quiet and I listened to our parents ask the same questions they always ask when she performs a milestone, pretending they had not heard the answer the first time because the repetition lets them bask longer, and I watched my name drift off the surface of the night like steam, while the waiter carried out the little graduation cake that my dad had ordered and then forgot to mention because my sister was busy describing baby names and prenatal vitamins, and I thought about how many times this exact rhythm had played before. How my birthday once became an emergency engagement planning session because she had hinted that she might be getting a ring. How my job offer dinner had turned into a tour of her wedding binder. How the holidays were always one part family, two parts her. And I felt that tight, steady anger that does not shout but writes things down. And gets to work. She leaned in again, asked if I was mad, and she did it with that wide-eyed innocence that always buys her cover, and I told her, with a smile that I know made her suspicious, because it did not wobble, that I was not mad, that I was happy for her, that I was also happy for me, which she ignored because in her world my happiness is either decorative or inconvenient, and then she asked me, for the table, what I was planning to do next now that I had graduated, pitching it like a kind invitation to speak, but framing it so that any answer would sound small next to a baby, which was the point, and I heard the little chorus of relatives lean in the way people lean into gossip, and I took a slow breath and decided that I would not compete on her terms. Not tonight, not ever again. So I thanked everyone who showed up for me, not with sarcasm or accusation, but with the kind of steady tone you use when you choose to be the adult in the room, and I talked about what this degree cost me in late nights and missed weekends and saved dollars, and how proud I was to have finished it without cutting corners, and I said I knew tonight was supposed to be a celebration of that, and I meant it when I said I hoped we could still hold space for both things, for me and for her, because families that cannot hold two feelings at once end up breaking into camps, and I am done living in camps, and I watched my mom glance down and my dad clear his throat, and I watched my sister try to read whether I was winding up to something, which made her nervous because she prefers to land the plane alone. Then I added one more thing, and I did it the way you slide a card across a table, not flashy, not loud, just enough to make the room shift. And I said that in the past I have sometimes swallowed my news out of politeness and then watched it get old in my mouth while everyone else cheered for something shinier, and that I would not do that anymore, and I said I had something of my own to share soon. Something I had earned without asking anyone for permission or money or introductions, and that I was going to let the timing be mine, not stolen, and I raised my glass and toasted her health and the baby's future, and I toasted my own future too, and I said I hoped the family would be just as excited when I spoke as they are right now, because I planned to make them very proud and, yes, maybe a little uncomfortable. The waiter, who could have written a book about family dinners without changing a single name, set the cake down in front of me with the words "Congratulations" to me written across it, and, before my sister could pull the attention back, I asked the staff to bring spare plates around the table, and when the knife was handed to me I did something that looked small but felt big, because small moves are how you reset a room, and I cut the first slice and handed it to my grandmother, who has watched years of my sister's shows with a frown she keeps polite, and then I handed the second slice to my sister with a steady smile and said that big news deserves big kindness, and that I was happy we could share a celebration without stepping on each other. which landed like a challenge wrapped in courtesy, because she heard what I left unsaid. There would be a next moment, and it would be mine, and she would not see it coming. My phone buzzed on the table with a message I had been waiting on for weeks, one word from someone who held a door I had been pushing at with both hands, and I saw the preview, and I felt the click of something important falling into place, and I did not announce it. I did not even open it in front of them, because I wanted to test a new muscle called restraint in front of an audience that thinks I am all patience and no spine, and I tucked the phone away and asked my dad to say a few words about what it meant to him to see me finish what I started, which made him straighten up like he remembered his part in this story, and he did. And the room softened for a minute, and I saw my sister's jaw tighten, because suddenly there was a second center of gravity, and it was not hers. When the check came, my mother reached for it, and my sister joked about the baby's first free meal, and I told the waiter, calmly and clearly, that the dean had already covered the cake, and that my own part of the bill was taken care of. And I watched my sister process the fact that someone important had invested in my night on purpose, and it was petty, maybe, or maybe it was simply accurate to stop letting my name be a footnote, and as we stood to leave she leaned in and asked again in that soft voice reserved for digs and secrets, whether my big thing was real or just talk, and I said that in a few weeks she would have her answer, and that I hoped she chewed carefully until then. She wanted a competition. She wanted me to chase her spotlight. She wanted me to play loud and lose my balance. But I walked out steady, holding the door for our parents and the future, and in the parking lot I sent a single reply to that message on my phone. One word that locked a plan I had been building in pieces while everyone thought I was just smiling and swallowing, and I knew, as I watched her watch me, that she would not sleep well until the next dinner, which was fine by me, because if she thought she had stolen my night, she had no idea what she had just started. By the time I got home that night, I could already feel the old script tightening around my ribs like it always did after one of her performances, and I knew that if I slipped into the same rhythm of venting to a friend, crying in the shower, and then pretending nothing happened at the next family gathering, I would be right back where I had always been, which is the supporting cast in a story that uses my milestones as set dressing. So instead of replaying her whisper on a loop, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug I did not drink, and I laid the last few years out like receipts, and what I saw was not random, not bad luck, not family chaos, but a simple machine that only worked because I kept supplying it with patience, silence, and logistics. When I say logistics, I mean the invisible work that makes her grand gestures look effortless, like the time my birthday brunch turned into a surprise engagement planning session, and I handled the reservations, and the seating chart, and the angry calls from aunts who suddenly could not sit near one another. Or the time she hinted about a promotion during my job offer dinner, and I was the one who drove our parents home when they were tipsy from celebratory drinks, and then consoled them later when it turned out she had misunderstood her boss, and there was no promotion at all. The point is, her spotlight always came with an invoice, and it was my name at the bottom, and I had been paying it without even reading the charges. When I started talking through this out loud, because sometimes hearing your own voice say a thing makes it harder to lie to yourself, what kept coming up was the way she uses timing like a weapon. By which I mean she plants her big moment right on top of mine so that any protest sounds selfish, and she counts on me to be the reasonable one who swallows the protest because I do not want to look petty. And she knows our parents will call it a misunderstanding, and she knows most people are too polite to name patterns, and once I said that out loud, it stopped feeling like a mystery and started feeling like a solvable problem. I called two people who have watched this dynamic without ever pushing themselves into it. My friend Renee, who collects facts like a lawyer even though she sells houses, and my cousin Mia, who is that rare relative who loves me without needing me to be small. And I told them what happened, and they did not say I was overreacting. They did not say pregnancy trumps everything. They said, very calmly, that the timing was not an accident and that if I wanted the machine to stop, I had to stop providing power, and I had to stop doing it with apologies and smiley faces, because neither one of those had ever moved the needle. So I began with a rule that sounds small but becomes huge when you enforce it, which is that you do not launch announcements at someone else's celebration, and because I knew that if I said that in a defensive tone it would be framed as jealousy. I wrote it in the language of care and hosting, and I sent it to the people who actually run our family calendar, which is not my mother and not my father, but my Aunt Carol who hosts every holiday and my grandmother who decides what counts as proper, and I said that since our family is growing and everyone has milestones and stress, I wanted to propose a simple tradition to make sure the person of the night actually gets their night, and that the rest of us can share our news the following day when the dust settles, and I framed it as a way to protect my sister from being overwhelmed by 1,000 questions about pregnancy details at random dinners, and I asked them to reply with thoughts. And within an hour my aunt wrote back a yes. In the kind of tone that ends a conversation, and my grandmother chimed in with a line about manners not being a museum artifact, and then 3 cousins added hearts and thank yous, and my mother, who hates conflict but loves anything that sounds like etiquette, wrote that she wished we had thought of this years ago, and I watched the social air in the room change without a single apology from me, and I admit it, I savored that. Predictably, my sister texted me privately with that syrupy tone she uses when she is furious and pretending not to be, asking if I had a problem with her news and whether I was trying to control her. And I told her that I did not have a problem with her news as long as she did not drop it on top of other people's events, and that this new tradition would help everyone breathe and make space for her, which she hated because it boxed her in without giving her anything to push against, and she responded with a long message about how families should be happy for each other in real time, and I said that I was incredibly happy for her, that I had toasted her, that I meant it, and that now I was also happy for me, and that I would be making an announcement of my own soon, and I was glad the family would have a structure in place to keep the night focused, which is when she stopped replying for hours, and I knew she was pacing, and I felt something settle in my chest that felt like the first brick of a wall I was building around my boundaries, not to keep love out, but to keep my value from spilling everywhere to be mopped up by people who pretended as rain. While that little fire burned on her end, I worked on a second piece that mattered more to me than etiquette, which was taking back every invisible favor that made her life look smoother than it is. Because part of her confidence comes from assuming that I will always be the quiet safety net behind her grandstanding, and I am done being a silent trampoline for someone who jumps on my shoulders and then complains about the view. So I called our phone provider and removed my name as the backup payer on the line she had once asked me to co-sign when her credit was messy, and I canceled a set of autopays that I had kept going out of inertia because she was always almost about to fix it, and I wrote a short, polite notice to the family group saying that I had stepped back from logistics and that any future event planning should go through whoever is hosting, which sounds like paperwork, but felt like life support being shut off, and the immediate effect was not fireworks, but it was real. My sister called my mother to ask why her phone bill now had late fees, and my mother called me to ask if something was wrong, and I said that everything was right, that I was living like an adult who does not subsidize disrespect, and my mother went quiet, which told me she heard the part 1 meant for her too. By the end of that week, I had learned 2 things that changed the angle of my plan. First, that my sister and her husband were counting on our parents to help with a down payment because his job had gone from solid to shaky, and they were trying to move quickly before lenders asked harder questions, and second, that the house she had been eyeing since spring was suddenly back on the market because the previous buyers fell through, and she had already posted a dreamy message about it in our family chat months ago as if calling dibs were a financial strategy, and because life has a sense of humor when you quit playing small, I realized that I knew the listing agent, not well, but well enough for a call, and that I had been working on my own move that did not require anyone's blessing. I booked a meeting for the following Tuesday, and I did not tell a soul, and when my sister texted that night to say she hoped I would not try to make the new no hijacking rule apply to baby shower planning because that would be absurd, I said I loved the new rule and I would be following it closely, which was the truth, especially because I had every intention of playing by it when I announced what I was about to sign, and the part that made me smile, just a little, was knowing that for once she was the one chewing carefully, while I was the one walking into a room where my name was already printed on the paperwork. In the days after the dinner, I made a choice that would have sounded small to anyone who has not spent years being outmaneuvered by a sister who turns timing into a contact sport, because instead of retreating into hurt or sprinting into some flashy counterattack, I decided to lean in with a kind of support that looks generous on the surface and functions underneath like a calm net for information. So I showed up for the first appointment where the nurse walked through basic prenatal stuff, and my sister wanted a witness to her confidence, and I took notes like a professional assistant because that is the role she understands me in, and I asked the questions that sound kind and are in their own way, such as how she was feeling and whether food was staying down and if her husband was sleeping or worrying, and then I stretched the circle a little wider and gently asked about the practical pieces that always sit in the corners and end up talking loud later, by which I mean money and housing and time off, and who would be around in the first months when you cannot tell day from night, and because I was not judging, and because I have earned a reputation for being useful without gossip, she gave me more than she realized. And it became clear that the bride announcements have, for a while now, been outpacing the spreadsheet, and that their plan depends on our parents helping with a down payment soon, and that the house she has been posting on and off in the family chat like a vision board was, suddenly, back in reach if they could move faster than the questions a bank asks when a job starts wobbling. When people think about bait, they think of trickery that tastes false, but the thing that works best is the kind of help you would genuinely give if you were not dealing with someone who weaponizes your generosity. So I did exactly what I would do for a client in a tough spot, and I offered to build a simple budget view, nothing judgmental. Just a clean map of what the next year might cost in diapers and deductibles and commuting and the hidden stuff that eats you alive when you are sleep deprived. And I said I could also gather a few lender options with different personalities so that they would not get locked into someone who promises the moon and then disappears. And she lit up because she heard the word options and thought it meant flexibility, when what it really meant was sunlight on numbers, and sunlight, as it turns out, is not her favorite weather. I set up a shared folder. I asked for pay stubs and bank statements and any email from a realtor that felt important, and within 48 hours I had a better view of their situation than she did, not because she is stupid, but because she prefers momentum to clarity, and momentum is a lovely feeling until you realize you are running on marbles. While I collected that material, I kept the tone of a sister who is happy to carry bags and hold doors, because you do not frighten the fish with splashing, and when she mentioned the house again, the charming one with the porch she had practically named, I asked only the sort of questions a supportive person asks, like whether the inspection report from spring had turned up anything and whether the seller had fixed the roofing or just patched the language, and she told me exactly what I needed to hear without understanding why it mattered, namely that the prior buyers had balked at a foundation note that was more scary in phrasing than in cost, and that the seller had been stubborn about a credit, and that they were hoping to slip in with a quick close if her husband's boss confirmed a title, all of which sounded like a fragile bridge built out of optimism and borrowed breath. I thanked her. I said I would run numbers for a down payment scenario with and without parental help, and then I did something that felt like putting a quiet hand on the wheel of my own life for the first time in a long time, because I picked up the phone and called the listing agent whose card had been sitting in my drawer since a networking event last fall. And I asked for a private showing at a time when no one who loves attention would want to stand in fluorescent light, and I said, very calmly, that I would be bringing a pre-approval letter and would prefer discretion for personal reasons, and she said she respected that, which is realtor code for I can smell a real buyer. There is a certain pleasure in preparing well when people have assumed you are all patience and no teeth, so I met with a lender I trust, the kind who does not inflate promises, and I sat in a chair I have sat in before as a hand holder for other people, and this time I put my own name on the line and showed my income, my savings, and my debt, and we set a number I could live with, not a fantasy, not a stretch that would keep me anxious. And with that letter in hand, I walked through the house. My sister had turned into a personality test, and I looked, not with envy or with a wish to poke holes, but with clear eyes and a notepad. And when the agent mentioned the foundation language, I asked to see the report and the quote for the work from a reputable company, and I noticed that the price on paper matched a little chunk of money I had put aside for something that felt like adulthood. And in that moment, a shape clicked into place that had nothing to do with spite and everything to do with choosing my own story, even if the timing would land like thunder in a room that counted on me to stay quiet forever. I did not make an offer that minute because impatience ruins good plans, so I asked for one day to run the numbers against my comfort level and to call a contractor my friend Renee trusts. And I went home and I built the budget I had promised my sister, while I also built a second, private one for myself, and when both documents were finished and honest, I saw that I could do this without asking my parents for a penny and without living on instant noodles, and the part of me that still worries about being labeled cruel took a breath and reminded the rest of me that buying a home I can afford is not an act of violence, and that the only reason it would feel like a knife to her is because she stabbed first and wanted me to bleed politely. The next morning, my offer went in with clean terms, an inspection window that was reasonable, and a request that the seller provide a modest credit toward the foundation work that was already priced, and I included a confidentiality clause about the buyer's identity until closing, because I have learned the hard way that noise contaminates everything. That afternoon, while I waited for the counter, my sister texted a photo of a crib she loved and a joke about learning to change a diaper without crying, and I sent back a sincere tip about a registry discount that kicks in late and how to time it to save more. Because I can do kindness and strategy in the same hand without shaking, and then, right as I was about to leave my desk, my agent called with a voice that smiled and said the seller had accepted with one small tweak on timing, and I said yes and wired the earnest money from my account without asking anyone to bless it, and I sat for a minute in that quiet high that comes from doing something you were told you needed permission to do and realizing you never did, later that evening. As if the universe wanted to see what I would do with restraint, my sister dropped a link in the family chat to the very listing I had just taken off the table, with a caption about feeling lucky because they were ready to make an offer this week. If all the stars aligned, and I typed good luck because I meant it in the way you mean it when you know luck has nothing to do with the next part, and I closed my laptop and let the hook set itself, because the bait had been taken and the line was already moving. The morning after the offer was accepted, I woke up with that strange, steady feeling you get when a decision has already been made and the work has shifted from convincing yourself to simply walking the steps. And because I've learned that dignity lives in logistics, I spent the next few days doing things that do not look like revenge on the surface, but absolutely are when you have spent years being dragged into other people's emergencies. So I met the inspector with a list that came from reading the report twice and asking a contractor 2 streets over what repairs actually taken time and money rather than drama. I scheduled the appraisal with a buffer that would not turn me into a hostage of someone else's calendar. I called my insurance agent and built the policy with the kind of boring detail that keeps people from knocking at your wallet later, and I arranged my bank transfer so the closing funds would sit where they needed to sit a full day early, all while replying to my sister's messages with the same steady tone I had used since the dinner, the tone that says I am not withholding affection, but I am absolutely withholding access, because access is what she burns for when she senses I am building something without her. The family machinery kept creaking along in the background, which worked for me, because my Aunt Carol announced that she would be hosting a small dinner to mark the end of the first trimester, which is the kind of event that exists only in families where attention is a currency, and my mother began floating ideas about flowers and favors as if we were planning a wedding. And in another life, I might have gotten caught in the undertow and started making spreadsheets, but this time I let the text chain buzz on without volunteering a stitch, and then, right when I was deciding whether to risk the discomfort of declining altogether, my grandmother called me and said, in that gentle way she has when she knows exactly where the bruise is, that she hoped I would come because she wanted to look me in the eye and tell me she was proud of what I had done, and even though she had no idea what I had done, I heard what she meant, which was that she had noticed I had stopped apologizing for existing, so I said I would be there, and then I looked at my calendar and realized something delicious, which was that my closing date fell the morning of that dinner, which was not planned by me but might as well have been. And I decided that if life sets the table, you do not argue with the place settings. Because I am not cruel and because I do not enjoy chaos, I made sure that every piece of this move was clean and private. So I asked my agent to file the confidentiality letter again at the attorney's office, and I used a personal email address that my sister does not have, and I told no one except Renee, who kept me grounded by reminding me that buying a home is not an attack even if it lands like one on people who build identity out of territory, and I promised myself that I would not break the new family rule we had just put in place, which meant I was not going to stand up at a table set for her milestone and announce anything, but that did not mean I could not make a quiet switch that would turn her theater into my stage after the curtain fell. Because the rule says no hijacking the occasion, not no speaking at all, and I intended to honor that in a way that would hurt precisely because it would be unimpeachably fair. 2 days before closing, my sister called with a tone that tried to be breezy and failed, asking if I would swing by their place to look over the latest lender email because the pre-approval felt wobbly and she wanted a second pair of eyes. And I almost said yes out of habit before I heard Renee's voice in my head asking why my time should be the only free resource in the family. So I said I could not come by, but that I recommended she read the conditions carefully, especially the part about employment verification, and I reminded her that if they were assuming help from our parents, it needed to be documented as a gift and not a secret loan, which is the kind of sentence that sounds neutral and feels like a boundary. And she laughed too loudly and said everything was fine, and then she asked whether I was still planning to share my news soon because it would be helpful to know the schedule, and I told her, very calmly, that I would not be announcing anything at her dinner because I respect the new rule, and that I would share my update the following day, which made her fall silent in that way that tells you a person is flipping through possible outcomes and finding none that feel safe. Closing day arrived with none of the fireworks stories like to include, which was exactly how I wanted it, because contracts do not care about family drama and wires do not blush, so I signed. I initialed. I checked the account one more time. I shook hands. And I left the office with a ring of keys that did not feel like trophies so much as tools, and I drove by the house not to gloat, but to take a deep breath outside a place that now had my name on it, and then I put the keys in my bag and went to my aunt's for the dinner where the script would flip without me breaking a single rule. At the table, my sister did what she always does, taking the room with practiced ease as she described symptoms and cravings, and the way strangers already had opinions about her belly. And the relatives asked the same round of questions with all the performative warmth they have perfected over the years, and I sat there steady and present and not resentful, because I had no reason to be, not anymore. And when the cake came out and my aunt made a toast about health and patience and new life, I raised my glass like everyone else, and I told my sister that I was happy for her and that she should sleep while she can and that I would drop off a list of registry tips tomorrow. And then I kept my mouth shut, which, in this family, is louder than any speech. And I watched her glance at me, trying to decide whether the danger had passed. After the plates were cleared and the house started to empty and the rule had been fully honored, I stepped into the kitchen with my grandmother and my aunt and my mother, who were doing that ritual cleanup that women in our family do even when we tell ourselves we are done with rituals, and I said, very simply, that I needed to coordinate a small delivery window for the next day, and it would be helpful if my aunt could be home for a signature because the truck would be on her street, and when my aunt asked what was being delivered, I told her it was a set of locks and a basic toolbox and a few boxes with my name on them, and then I said the address out loud, the one my sister had claimed years ago in her head and in our group chat. And my mother turned, dish towel in her hand, and she looked at me the way you look at a person who just moved the furniture in your mind, and I added, because I am not theatrical, but I am precise, that starting tomorrow the house everyone has been touring in their imagination would be mine, and that I would be very grateful if we could keep it quiet until I had changed the locks and met the contractor, and my aunt put the towel down like it weighed something and said she would be there. And my grandmother smiled with all the softness of a woman who has seen every kind of show and prefers the ones where the quiet girl wins, and from the doorway my sister made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cough, and I knew the switch had landed, which meant I had one more move to make, and I saved it for morning. I woke up the next morning with the kind of calm that does not ask permission and does not need a pep talk. And while the delivery truck eased into my aunt's quiet street and the driver asked where I wanted the boxes marked hardware and the small carton with the lock sets, I stood on that porch with my keys in my hand and decided that the announcement would be done in a way that respected the rule we had created, honored the boundary I had fought to build, and still landed with the finality of a gavel. So I sent a message in the family chat that thanked my aunt for hosting the dinner, congratulated my sister again, and said that I had a small life update to share later that afternoon for anyone who wanted to stop by for 10 minutes on their way home from errands. Nothing formal and no gifts. Just a quick toast because I had paperwork to sign with a contractor and could not linger, and I added the address without fanfare like it was any other address, which, for me now, it was. The contractor arrived first, because adulthood, as it turns out, loves punctual people, and we walked through the foundation note with a measured tone that would have sounded boring to the version of me who used to perform competence for other people. And I signed the work order and set the deposit and felt that clean click of a plan executed without drama, and then my aunt slipped in through the side gate carrying a grocery bag with disposable cups because she said she did not trust anyone not to break her good glasses on a doorstep, and my grandmother followed behind her with that look that says she knows when a chapter is closing. And a few minutes later my parents drifted up the walk wearing the kind of careful curiosity people use when they sense a shift and do not know yet if it will cost them. And I hugged them and put 2 labeled keys in my father's hand and said they were for emergencies only, text first, no drop-ins, and he nodded like he was relieved to be told the rules. Because rules mean you belong somewhere, and then the sound I had been expecting came from the curb. That quick, sharp inhale she does when she thinks she has caught a lie. Because my sister stepped out of their car with a reusable cup and a thin smile, and said she hoped this was a joke because she had a call with their lender in an hour and did not have time for whatever this was. I did not make a speech because speeches are for people who need to convince, so I opened the door, led them into a room that still smelled like fresh paint and new locks, set the little stack of manila folders on the counter, and slid the top one toward her with the closing packet visible, my name printed next to the address she has been rehearsing out loud for months. And I watched the color in her face change in a way that I will not describe as anything other than human because this is not about humiliating her in the way she has often humiliated me. It is about letting reality do its own heavy lifting, and she took a sip of whatever was in her cup, misjudged the swallow because her focus was on the deed, and coughed so hard she had to set the drink down, which in any other family might have been funny, but in ours counted as a confession. She asked how I could do this to her, and I answered the question the way a calm adult answers a child who does not like the word no, by saying that I did not do anything to her, that I did something for myself, that I followed the new rule to the letter by waiting until the day after her dinner, that I used my own money and my own approval and my own timeline, that I would not be taking any help meant for her baby or her household, and that I wished her well on whatever home they chose next. Because there are many houses and only one of me, and I intend to treat that as a fact and not an apology. Then, because patterns are stubborn, she switched angles and accused me of stealing her dream. And I told her that dreams are not property deeds and that she had been banking on other people to make hers real while I had been building mine with the same quiet hands she has always assumed were only there to catch her and my mother, who hates conflict more than she loves accuracy, tried to smooth it by suggesting we all take a breath, and I said I was breathing just fine, thank you, and I handed my father a small envelope with a printout of the first auto transfer I had set up for a modest education fund in my future niece or nephew's name, managed by me with distributions at my discretion because I am done being a silent bankroll without boundaries, and I said that this was my way of saying I am not the enemy of her family, I am simply the advocate for my own life, and the look that crossed his face told me that for once he saw the difference. The husband, who has always preferred to be a background character until applause cues him forward, muttered something about their lender being unprofessional for not warning them. And I said lenders do not warn buyers about properties they do not own, and that a house is not a prom date you can call dibs on, and I left it at that, because winning does not require gloating, it requires clarity. And to keep the moment clean, I raised my cup with the cheap sparkling water my aunt had brought and said that I was grateful for everyone who had shown up to witness a grown woman making a decision without asking anyone to clap first, and that if they wanted to be proud of me, they were welcome to, and if they needed time, they could take it, because my worth was not on layaway anymore. A few minutes later, my sister's phone rang, and she answered on speaker without meaning to, which is how all of us heard the loan officer explain, in the tone people use when they have said the same sentence 3 times already, that the property went under contract days ago, that the sale closed yesterday morning, and that they should look at other listings or focus on stabilizing employment before making any further offers. And there was a long, taut moment where you could feel the old machine trying to power up, the one where I would rush to soothe and fix and make myself useful so no one had to sit in discomfort, and I let that machine die right there on the kitchen counter, because I am not its power source anymore. Before they left, I walked my parents to the door and told them that I would host a quiet housewarming in a few weeks after the repairs were scheduled and the boxes were broken down. Nothing theatrical, just family and a simple meal and a chance to begin a new pattern. And my mother squeezed my hand and asked if she could bring dessert, and I said yes as long as it was for me, and my grandmother leaned in and whispered that every woman deserves one room in this world where her name cannot be talked over, and my aunt, who never misses a beat, volunteered the exact day and time like we were sealing a treaty. My sister lingered, of course she did, because the show only ends when she has tried every exit, and she asked, low and sharp, if I felt good about topping her, and I told her I did not top her. I stopped letting her set the height. And I walked her out without malice, because I do not hate her. I hate the job I used to do for her, and I quit, and when I closed the door behind them and leaned my forehead against the cool wood for one long breath, I did not think about victory or losers. I thought about the small girl version of me who used to whisper that one day she would have something no one could take, and I told her we made it, and that the next time someone clinks a glass to steal a night, I will let them clink. And then I will invite them over the following day to a home with my name on it, where the only thing being topped is the silence that used to swallow me, and where the final move is not a scream, but a set of keys on a hook, quietly shining where everyone can see who they belong to.